Do you love Kindred decks that like to anthem and pump all of your creatures, but do you also hate to do math? Like really hate to do math? As in it's unbearable. Also, do you like cute bears? Then you are going to fall in love with this Kudo deck. Today, we are covering a Kudo Anthem Commander deck that nerfs all of your opponent's creatures, creates you a ton of bear tokens, pumps your board to be the biggest, and then keeps all of the combat math nice and easy. I'll be honest with you here, when I first saw Kudo, I was not excited. I thought, oh great, well we got three options here. A meme deck, a stacks deck, or a meme stacks deck. But then our podmate Luuk came up with a really fun idea. And when I heard that easy math was involved, I was in. It also didn't hurt that when we playtested this, I saw Sasha have like 100 bear tokens and they were all 32/32s against the board of 2/2 little dudes. It was nasty and actually quite fun. Now personally, I do want to love Anthem decks, but I do not like uneven math. Having different creature power and toughness and then adding uneven anthems on top of it, this anthem pumps it to be +2/+1, but just legendary creatures, well this one pumps it to be +1/+4, but only during our turns and only my tokens. It just gets so messy so fast. Keeping track of dice is super obnoxious. But not here and not today, friends, because the math with Kudo scales nice and evenly, allowing you to pump your board of bears to be consistently big as f. And the math is even easy for your opponents because they're all getting 2/2 bears. So throw away your calculators and grab your honeypots because we are about to bear down on your opponents with Kudo, King Among Bears. First, let's take a look at big ol' Kudo. Kudo, King Among Bears is a 2/2 bear for 1 green and 1 white. Other creatures have base power and toughness 2/2 and are bears in addition to their other types. Nice and simple block of text. This means that all creatures on the board are 2/2s, but it is important to call out that they all keep their other abilities. Now that everything is a 2/2, let's pump our board of bears to be bigger than our opponent's board of bears. And like I said earlier, we are doing this all with easy math. So anytime we pump our bears, it's doing it with +1/+1, +2/+2, and so on. Any player having different sized creatures is not allowed. When playing this deck, it's worth telling your opponents what this deck is doing, letting them know that this is not a full-blown stack strategy. Instead, it's just a cute bear that failed math in high school, but was really good at being the king of the drama club. The first goal of this deck is to play Kudo out as soon as possible. Luckily, given Kudo is a 2-drop, we'll be able to replay him with commander attacks at a rate that scales nicely with the ramp that we are getting by playing green. Once Kudo is sitting pretty, we'll create an army of bears that'll help us bring home the honey. So let's take a look at some of the bears that will help us do this. This deck takes advantage of a token strategy that helps create a massive pumped army of bears, one that wants to be pumped as big as possible. Now exactly how big can we pump our board state here? We will soon see. But first, in the early turns, we will want to get our token engine up and running. The new Modern Horizons 3-card Oscillate Pride is awesome and an ideal turn 1 play. It has First Strike, Lifelink, and Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, create a white cat bear creature token. Then if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that enter the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. This card is perhaps a new mono white staple in EDH, and it provides us a ton of value. And since we'll be quickly buffing our boards, these cat bears will quickly become big dominating creatures that overpower your opponents. Another great 1-drop creature is Riz the Redeemed, a 1/1 elf warrior bear for 1 hybrid Selesnya. And remember that all of these power and toughnesses are when Kudo is not on the battlefield. But once he's there, everything will be at least a 2/2 or bigger as they come in. You can pay 2 generic and 1 hybrid Selesnya, tap, create a 1/1 green and white elf warrior bear creature token. You can also pay 4 generic and 2 hybrid Selesnya and tap. For each creature token you control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. This is a little mana intensive, but being able to double all of our bear tokens is huge. Another new Modern Horizons 3 card is Spring Heart Nantuko, an absolutely bonkers card that is good in any green deck wanting to make tokens. It's a 1/1 insect monk for 1 generic and 1 green, and it has Bestow for 1 generic and 1 green that allows it to enchant a creature. And it has a landfall trigger that reads, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 generic and 1 green if it is attached to a creature you control. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. If you didn't create a token this way, create a 1/1 green insect bear creature token. Now Springheart Nantuko can get completely out of control, making us a ton of 2/2 bears. But what else would help in this department? Bramaz, King of Oreskos, fits this mold. A 3/4 cat soldier for 1 generic and 2 white. It has vigilance, which is an important keyword to call out. out. And whenever it blocks a creature, create a 1/1 white cat soldier bear creature token with vigilance that's also blocking that creature. The vigilance ability helps us create a 2/2 white cat bear token with vigilance when we attack, and potentially again when we block during the same turn cycle. Once your board starts to get pumped, these vigilance tokens are going to come really in handy. Now another one that can get completely out of control is Katara, Caller of the Small, a 3/3 orc ranger for 1 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. It has trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, for each token you control, create a 1/1 white rabbit bear creature token. Now this 3-drop can help us boost our board to an alarming state. If our opponent's creatures are a bunch of 2/2s and this card is pumped to be bigger, the trample ability will hopefully let us connect and get the trigger. And this will effectively double the amount of creatures on our board. And they will not just be 1/1 white rabbits, but instead 2/2 rabbit bears that will be pumped to a much bigger stature. And of course, the ability to double our board gets better and better as the game goes on. Another card that will get completely out of hand is Scoot Swarm. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect bear creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. Once you control 6 lands, this card exponentially gets better because of having another copy of this ability on the battlefield. Freaking busted, my bear dudes. Now lastly, an out of control token generator that I want to call out is a card called Adipose Offspring, a 2/2 alien for 3 generic and 1 white. You may cast this spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 white alien bear token. Now if the emerge cost was paid, instead create X of those tokens, where X is the sacrifice creature's toughness. Now emerging this in the earlier game may not net you that many bear tokens, but it can be worth it. But in the late game, this card can get things hairy if you've pumped your bear army to a grisly state. Other creature token generators are cards like Chittering Dispatcher. It creates token copies of itself when it attacks, and when it dies you get a dork. Arasta of the Endless Web is an all-star in any green token deck, creating a green spider bear token whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell. This thing provides so much value with 3 opponents. Some interesting synergies with our spider friend here is a Eula, Queen Among Bears, because whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, you will have a bear token enter the battlefield under your control. Then you choose between put 2 1/1 counters on target bear, but more importantly, target bear you control fights target creature you do not. This can potentially remove any problematic opponent controlled bear. And if your bears are bigger, and as long as your opponent's bear doesn't have death touch, yours will survive. Now that's just bearific value. Canotep Scarab Swarm has an ETB that lets you exile target player's graveyard. For each artifact or land card that was exiled this way, create a 1/1 colorless insect bear artifact creature token with flying. Awesome graveyard hate that has great synergy with our bears. Wolverine Rider has, at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green elf warrior bear token. Gotta love those bears. Whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to its toughness. This can net us a ton of life when our entire board state is pumped to a big and beefy state. Now once we start the token train, where does Kudo want to go next? To the gym, obviously, because we need to pump our bear babies to be big and buff. There are plenty of ways to anthem and grow your bear army to be bear enormous. I got myself with that one. Now before your board state is wide, playing out an early turn Rally the Ranks is awesome. A 2-drop enchantment for 1 generic and 1 white. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, bears. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Making your bears just 3/3s gives you an advantage over your opponent's 2/2 bears. Radiant Destiny pumps and has some extra benefits. A 3-drop enchantment for 2 generic and 1 white. It has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, bears. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1, and as long as you have the city's blessing, they also have vigilance. Giving all of your creatures vigilance is just another way to have your bear state, board state take advantage of your opponents. Commander's Insignia is awesome because of how cheap it is to replay Kudo from the command zone. A 4-drop enchantment for 2 generic and 2 white. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each time you've casted your commander from the command zone this game. Even replaying Kudo once from the command land zone helps this card become great value. Now Marshall's Anthem is an anthem that can also recur creatures from your graveyard. It has multi-kicker for 1 generic and 1 white. You may pay an additional 1 generic and 1 white any number of times as you cast this spell. Creatures you control get +1/+1, and when it enters the battlefield, return up to X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times that it was kicked. This is helpful to return bears with important abilities, helping us dominate the bear state. Helping us dominate the board state. I'm turning into a bear. A card with amazing value is Mirari's Wake, a 5-drop enchantment for 3 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced. An anthem that also doubles as a mana doubler to spend on more bears? Count me in, my furry friend. A card that can get stronger as the game goes on is Boon of the Spirit Realm, a 5-drop enchantment for 3 generic and 2 white. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a blessing counter on it. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each blessing counter on it. Playing this before even more enchantments hit your battlefield will help add to the overall power and toughness of your bear army. Another big pumper is Beastmaster Ascension, and let's just pretend those little kitties are big bears. It's a 3-drop enchantment for 2 generic and 1 green. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on it. Whenever it has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. Nice. We will quickly reach this 7 quest counters threshold and make our bears big. Now a fun little trick can be flashing in the 5-drop enchantment Dictate of Heliod. Creatures you control get +2/+2. An opponent may think they're making a good trade when everyone's bears are 2/2s. Flash this in and all of your bears will survive. Now the last enchantment that I want to call out can get completely out of control, and that, my friends, is Unnatural Growth. At the beginning of each bear combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. This itself is powerful, but when you combine it with other keyword abilities, this can get completely out of control and be a problem for your opponents and their little bears. Like with Orion Frostfang, which gives all of your attacking creatures Death Touch. Or perhaps with Blossoming Bog Beast, giving all of your bears Trample. Whenever it attacks, you gain 2 life. Then creatures you control gain Trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life that you have gained this turn. And if you have Trample, Toski, Bearer of Secrets, is excellent. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now another big component of this deck is Power Matters cards, which may look awkward when playing them out early in the game, but as soon as your bears are buffed, they are awesome. With Elemental Bond, whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. If you have a single anthem for +1/+1, this synergizes well with any card triggering the creation of a bear token. Now similar is Kavu Lair, except it draws you a card when your bears are buffed to be 4 power. And of course there's Garruk's Uprising. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have Trample, which is a very nice bonus. Excellent value for us. Now before we talk about how to pilot this deck, I do want to call out a couple of important sorcery and instant spells that can help progress our game plan, and which all can help you win the game. Pest Infection doubles as enchantment and artifact removal while creating you black and green pest bear tokens. Now Awaken the Woods lets you pay X to create a bunch of Dryad Arbor bear tokens. Now it's important to call out that these are both creatures and lands. So this is a ramp spell in addition to being a great way to make a bunch of bear tokens and trigger our landfall effects. Marshall Coop can be used to create a few bear tokens and or a way to clear the rest of the board if necessary. But there are some good instant speed goodies too. And all of these can help you close out the game for you and your good bears. Like with the card Secure the Waste, an easy way to create a ton of white soldier bear tokens for X. Use this when your opponent's passes priority from attacking to blocks, and you can remove any problematic attacking creatures. There's also Grand Crescendo, a card with a similar effect, but it also gives creatures you control indestructible until end of turn. And lastly, there's March of the Multitudes, a little more mana intensive at face value, but is excellent when you have a board of untapped bear tokens. And that's because it has Convoke. Your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for 1 generic or 1 mana of that creature's color. Time this just right, likely during an opponent's end step, and you'll be bearing it all on your next combat phase. Now, how exactly does this Kudo deck want to be piloted to take home the big bear win? It's honestly pretty straightforward while still being a ton of fun. Get Kudo out on the battlefield and keep him there at all costs. And remember, even if he gets removed, it's fairly easy to keep recasting Kudo given he is only a 2-drop. So commander tax will likely scale nicely as this deck ramps up. Get your Anthem cards out onto the battlefield so your bears are bigger than your opponents. Then start making a ton of bear tokens as fast as possible. Then find cards that give your bears more keyword abilities, like Vigilance, Death Touch, and Trample. Cast your Power Matters cards so you can draw more and more cards. A natural progression of pumping your bears with Trample can lead to victory, but saving cards with Create X Bear tokens can secure you the win pretty fast in later turns. It's super important to call out that these type of Create X Bear token spells can also help you rebuild, and rebuild fast. This will be when you get hit by a board wipe or a mass bounce spell like Cyclonic Rift. Just keep your bear engine going and you will have a shot at winning any game. One last thing to note is that some players won't mind Kudo being out because they're not running big stompy decks. But those big stompy decks might not take too kind to our cute Kudo here and put a big target on his ginormous bear back. And if that is the case, make sure to be precise about when you're playing Kudo out, hopefully with some protection like with Swift Foot Boots or Lightning Greaves. Now you are all ready to go to Bear Value Town with Kudo, king among bears. Please comment below and let us know which commander deck you would like us to cover next. Bloomborough is right around the corner, so make sure to keep your eyes peeled on the commanders from that set that you want us to do some spicy brews on. Thank you so much to my co-writer and co-brewer of this deck, Sasha Jelten, and also to the other co-brewer of this deck, Luuk. Luuk, you f***ing rule. Now go bear it all and be unbearable to your opponents with the baddest bear in town.